Hello, welcome to RNTC debate. Our topic today is it possible to achieve balance when covering news? I'm your host, Douglas Namale. To discuss the topic, in the studio I have Zafar Iqbal. He's a reporter from Kashmir in India, and he has been covering conflict issues for the last 10 years. And on my right is Louis Dan, a Dutch reporter from Radio Netherlands Worldwide, who covers international stories. We have seen since the uprising in Syria, we have not seen a little more about the government side. And I was wondering, and I talked to one of the BBC senior editors, and this guy said they focus more on the genuineness other than balance. So to try and discuss this issue, let us first hear from a reporter from Uganda, Rebecca Birungi. Then we proceed on with our discussion.
Last year in 2011, the state broadcasting in Uganda, the state broadcaster TV, was giving more coverage to the president and the ministers, as opposed to also giving coverage to other candidates who are also on the campaign trail for the presidents. So in that sense, there was lack of balance because it was mainly President Museveni. The other side of the opposition were not really given fair coverage. So in that sense, balance needs to be achieved by giving both sides.
Rebecca says balance needs to be achieved, and he says journalists needs to be fair. So, Zafar, is genuine slowly replacing balance?
Well, these are two different terms, Douglas. Genuineness of a news story and balance in a news story. As you have put up an example of the Syria coverage in the BBC for the last few months we have been following, and I also agree that I haven't seen any version from the government in any of the stories of the BBC, which has to a great extent disappointed me. Because I believe if it's difficult for them to get a government representative, they can even speak to an ambassador in their own countries to make the story more balanced. But it's, as you yourself said, one of the BBC editors said that they put more focus on genuineness of the story than balance. But I believe any story can be genuine, but it's not necessarily it can't necessarily be balanced story, but we as journalists must strive for balance in all of our stories. That's what we have been taught in our journalism schools, and I believe that's one of the important elements of the charter of the BBC. If they are changing that thing, then we are in for a different sort of journalism, which perhaps will not reflect truth, which is the main principle of journalism, which I think all of us should abide to.
Zafar says we need to focus on the truth. You have been covering international news, and the Syria case is a critical example. So what is your opinion on this?
Well, the problem is, of course, Zafar, that truth, it depends from what side you're looking, what the truth is. Everyone will insist that their own version of events is the truth. And I think that's maybe a little bit the danger if you start going too far down the path of a story being genuine. Everyone's story is genuine. My experience of an event is genuine. A rebel fighter's experience is a genuine experience. So is a government's army soldier's experience. It's not enough, I think, for us as journalists to ask if a story is genuine or not, but we also have to ask if, and this is for me I think more important, the balance comes in making sure that the range of genuine is as broad as possible. So we may give space to someone to tell a story, and within that story there's no balance, but I have to ensure that someone else tells their genuine story. That's where the balance comes.
I think what he was perhaps referring to was that they are showing the situation on the ground, and it's a genuine story that fighting is going on the ground. But then the fighting has been between two parties. If you only show one party and you only reflect upon their opinion, then I don't think that is good journalism, because you have to present both the sides of the story, and then only the viewers or the readers can make their own discretion. It's up to them to make their own discretion what is what, but we as journalists need to tell whatever is possible, whatever is within our reach, to explore those quarters and tell a full story.
And
Yes.
and then too, I think to look at the whole range of reporting on a story. It may well be, for instance, that you're working in a media landscape where most people are choosing to cover one side of the story, and because that one side of the story is being given enormous coverage, it's then perhaps your duty to bring balance by going, right, I'm going to dedicate myself in an unbalanced way, you could say, to the other side of the story, because that's what needs exposure to give the balance, that the other side, the other genuine truth, is being given all the airtime or newsprint that it needs.
Yes, you just heard we need to focus more on expanding the genuineness and looking at balance, trying to stretch it so that we are able to get both sides balancing. We'll also listen from a journalist from Brazil, Isabella Vieira, who has been working for a public broadcaster for 5 years, and hear what she has to say about this topic.
In order to assure some balance in the reports, we should not be arbitrary. Despite our own opinions about the story, the journalist should report without any prejudice or bias, what is really difficult to keep in mind. It's a challenge, actually. And even though we are supposed to know everything about the interviewee, we should act as we didn't know anything about his or her point of view. Sometimes people can change their minds, and the journalist's role is finding it out.
Yeah. You hear Isabella saying it's a challenging task, particularly when you are working for a government side. But is it really the case when, given what you're saying?
Well, it depends. Sometimes if the journalists are an interface between the government and the public and the people. So government does good things and government does bad things. Obviously the government would want the journalists and the media only to reflect the good things that have been done by the government and not to cover the bad things. And when there is a good story, they will be very forthcoming. They will come and give you sound bites and everything. But when it's a story that hits them, they are not there. But we as journalists, we have to strike. We cannot be public relations PR agencies of the government or some agencies, because that will be doing a very disservice to the profession. So I believe we have to keep on trying, and there are occasions when government will or the people in authority would not speak to you, and those are the real stories. You have to dig deep and try and find a way to tell them.
Zafar, you just said that sometimes the government will not be able to tell us the story, and or simply block giving their own side of the story, and probably this is what you have seen in Syria. But we have extra sources, like I've seen BBC airing clips from YouTube. I've seen CNN doing the same. Do you think this is the good journalism practice?
I think, on the one hand, I think yes, because via these new channels, social media, YouTube, Twitter, all these things, there is a chance for us to have access to news from countries where there's like Syria, where it's very difficult to get news, where there is no freedom of reporting, there is no freedom of the press, and social media can be a way of getting around that. But
in a scenario where the social media are there, but these media outlets decides to go for the for the opposition side and absolutely decline looking for the other side of the government, do we still say it is balanced?
Yeah, no, because I think that is, that is the other side of the social media story as well, is that anyone can say anything and it doesn't have to be true. And we mustn't, as journalists, think, well, because everyone's going crazy with this story on Twitter, it must be right, and that we can bring that as news. We have to remain just as critical of those sources as we might be from an official government source. But it's almost impossible, I think, to be 100% sure. I mean, it's always a different kind of balance than when you're covering news. You want to take the time to be as sure as you can be, but if you take too long, it's not news anymore. News is news. You have to be able to respond quickly. And that's, I think, where sometimes we as journalists get a little bit careless in terms of balance and genuineness of stories, is that in the rush to get there first, we miss the detail.
I would say,
Yes.
I would agree to this. It's better to be right and be second with the news than to be wrong and to be first. One should always strive for a good story which is correct rather than just go for a wrong story. But I would like to say, Douglas, there are two things. One is you unintentionally miss the balance. Second is you intentionally miss the balance. If there is embedded journalism going on in Syria, there are rebel fighters and there are journalists who are going around with them, they are showcasing their weapons and all that. It's embedded journalism. They're bound to present just one side of the story, but the story should also be that where do you get your weapons from? It should be, there are many stories to it, but you can very easily find out that this is a projection. I strongly believe that we shouldn't go with a preconceived agenda, and when a journalist goes with a preconceived agenda, obviously difficulties are bound to rise.
This brings us back.
Now that we have had all this embedded journalism and all this, in just one sentence, where are we as a journalism now?
Where are we? We are... I'm not sure I can say where we are. I can say where we need to be, we need to be asking questions always about everything, no matter what the source. Ask questions. Don't take anything for granted.
Ask questions. Zafar?
I'll simply sum it up by saying that technology is advancing, things are changing, but the basic rules are the same. Stick to the basic principles of journalism. I believe there is scope for doing good journalism, even in these advancement in technologies and things like social media and all that. The basics will never report. Good journalism will always be valued, and there will be audience for that.
Okay. Thank you very much. You have had it. Go for what is right. That is what our two panelists have said. Until next time, my name is Douglas Namale. Goodbye.